This has been fascinating for lots of different reasons, as me and Ali were just talking about there, the weight being one of them, the way that they talk to each other as well, the father's involvement. I've seen Chris Eubank Jr. on Twitter and on social media eating steak, going to Salt Bay restaurants, doing all sorts of things. He's not worried about the weight at all. I imagine those things were filmed a while ago, or he's just taking one mouthful. What's going on, Eddie?
Well, no one really knows. And I think someone said, oh, that was an old video. But then he said at the end of the video, 60%, baby. And that's his kind of mantra for this fight. He says all he needs to be is 60% to beat Conor Benn. I've got to say, this is a promoter's dream. I mean, last night we had the media launch. They bounce off each other so well. And they are their father's sons. I mean, Conor Benn is like a caged lion. You know, he snaps at every word you say, just like his dad. And Eubank is kind of posturing around, getting out of his McLaren on the red carpet and, you know, his Louis Vuitton jacket that squeaks as he walks. And, like, they just look like looking in a mirror at the fathers. And to be honest, I think without the dads, they've both earned the right to be in a huge fight as world-class fighters. But with the fathers, it's a fight that just goes and moves across generations. You know, everybody remembers the first two fights, probably who's over the age of 40, you know, all the way up to the 80s and 90s. And now the younger generation have witnessed these two great fighters come through. And I still can't believe they're getting in the ring with each other on Saturday.
Eddie, it's brilliant. I can't wait. I won't surprise you. I am of that generation that's just over 40, and I do remember their father's fights.
Same, mate, same.
And they were magnificent, absolutely magnificent. Now, I want to ask you a question. In a bizarre way, could this count against the two lads? Because no matter what they serve up at the weekend, it might not be, you know, similar to what we saw those years ago.
Yeah, I think if they didn't have the styles that they have, you would worry about that. But Conor Benn, you know, watch his fights. He's never in a bad fight. Chris Eubank Jr. has decided, I think he's just going to go out, meet him in the middle of the ring and go to war with him. He feels like he's the much bigger man in there, the bigger puncher. And he's right, actually. And I think he genuinely feels like this is an easy assignment for him on Saturday night. You know, Ben Eubank won in Birmingham in 1990 was an unbelievable fight. Ben Eubank 2 at Old Trafford 3 years later was a good fight, and most people thought Nigel Benn won that fight. It ended in a draw, and everybody wanted to see the trilogy, but it never got made. So you got to understand, like Conor Benn has grown up with the Eubank name in the household, almost as if you mustn't mention that name. You know, because he's had that rivalry in his household for years and years. Eubank not so. You know, it's always really come. The fire's always come from the Benn side.
You touched on it there, Eddie. You said Eubank might meet him in the middle of the ring and go to war with him. However, one of his previous trainers, none other than the great Roy Jones Jr., who isn't training him for this fight, has said that might be the biggest mistake he could make, because he's actually said, do not underestimate the power of Benn.
Yeah, I mean, look, Conor Benn is a huge puncher at welterweight. Obviously, one of the biggest talking points of this fight is the weight. Mm-hmm. You know, you've seen the comments from Chris Eubank Sr., who talks about, you know, his worry of the danger of Chris Eubank Jr. coming down 3 pounds. Trust me, the danger in this fight is for Conor Benn. He's moving from 147 to 157. And also, there's a rehydration clause where Eubank can only come in 10 pounds heavier the day after.
Yeah.
So, you know, Chris Eubank Sr., there was no one more brutal at making weight than Chris Eubank Sr. Right? Isn't it remarkable to think that back in those days, Ali, they would weigh in on the afternoon of the fight.
Amazing.
Not the day before the fight. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an example. For Chris Eubank Sr. against Nigel Benn 1, I won't tell you how much Chris Eubank Sr. lost on the day of the fight, but my dad was promoting that fight and managing him. And how he did it and how he went out and had 9 brutal rounds and beat Nigel Benn, I will never know. Now, that's dangerous. This is 36 hours of rehydration. This is a guy coming down, I think, 1 pound or 2 pounds lower than he's ever been. It will be tough for Chris Eubank Jr. to take those few pounds off, but it will be very tough for Conor Benn jumping up to face a big middleweight on the night.
Eddie, I was fortunate enough years ago to be at some of these fights with Watson, Eubank and Benn when they fought each other. They were just incredible, you know, sporting events. Now, I'm going to ask you a question you might not be able to answer. Who's the best influence, father-wise, Eubank or Benn? Which one of those two young boxers is getting the best influence and the best guidance from their fathers?
Well, I mean, that's a personal question, isn't it, for those guys? But I think at the end of the day, Nigel Benn has kind of done a 360 in life. You know, he was a lunatic, quite frankly. And you know, my dad will always tell me that when Nigel Benn came in the office, he didn't know whether he was going to chin him or break down in tears and cuddle him. He was that kind of character.
Yeah.
But everybody loved Nigel Benn, especially Stuart, from where you were. You would have grown up in that era.
Yeah.
You'd seen Nigel Benn out.
Yes.
You know, he'd be knocking someone out, then he'd be down Legends DJing at night until 4 o'clock in the morning. You know, then on the next day he was on a plane to Tenerife, out there for the week. You know, so he was like the lad's lad.
Yeah.
But he was also a lunatic. And over the years, he's calmed down, he's found faith, and he's been a great role model for Conor. You got to understand about Conor Benn. Conor Benn left Australia, where they live, left the entire family, and came over to make his name as a boxer with very little amateur experience. He hasn't seen, he's got a young son, his mum and his sister and all those guys are coming over. They haven't seen Conor Benn's son. They haven't seen him for 4 years.
Wow.
So he's made massive sacrifices. Eubank Jr. has always been at the forefront of Junior's career.
Yes.
You know, often taking the limelight away. And just in the recent years, obviously they had some personal tragedy as well. You know, he stepped back a little bit. And I've got to say, Chris Eubank Jr. has come across really well in the build-up to this fight. You know, he's a good young man. He's funny. You know, he's very tough. And I think that the best compliment I can give to both of these men is that boxing really is a working class man's sport, right? You have to be incredibly tough. And the ones that make it generally are the ones that have to fight their way out of adversity to give themselves a better life. These are two kids that grew up in a mansion, yet are probably tougher than 99% of the kids you'll meet in the gym, that train harder than the kids that come from the street. So it's in them. The genetics is in them. The desire is in them. And they feel an obligation to carry this family name forward. And they fight with passion. And they won't give an inch on Saturday night. This means so much more. It's so refreshing to see no belts, right? No intercontinental belts, no interim world titles, no world titles, unified titles. Just a great fight for pride, for rivalry, you know, for all of that. And I can't wait. And that, like I say, this means so much to them. You know, Nigel Benn will be there in the corner. Chris Eubank maybe will be there. We expect him to pop up at the O2. But, you know, this runs deep.
talkSPORT Breakfast with Laura Woods. Monday to Wednesday morning, 6 till 10. On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.